Hi everyone, Frank Spangler here for ADRA Canada, and in today's lesson we're going to be continuing our series on the Canon 90D camera, and specifically we're going to be looking at some of the what Canon calls creative modes of the camera, allowing the photographer to be just a little bit more creative as they take their shots by allowing them to adjust some of the manual settings of the camera. Let's get started. Before we get started, I wanted to cover an important point, and we'll be coming back to this point often as we move our way from the auto settings towards using the camera in the total manual settings. And that's our goal. We want to end up to a point where you will be able to work easily in the manual settings almost without thinking of the adjustments that you're making. It's going to become so second nature to you. We want you to get to the point where you can make manual adjustments to the camera in the dark. Because there'll be situations where you're filming in a low light situation in a dark room, maybe with a stage that's lit up, where you might not be able to see very easily where your dials are and where your buttons are, and yet you need to be able to make those kinds of adjustments in the dark. And so that's where we're headed. We want you to become so comfortable with the manual settings of this camera that you can do it with your eyes closed. But as we start this journey, from the total auto settings of the camera that we showed you in our last lesson to the total manual settings, I want to start talking about the three main manual settings that you can adjust to give you more creativity as you take photos and video. There's only three, really. I mean, there is maybe a fourth if you consider focusing. But the Canon, for the most part, does such an amazing job at autofocus, especially when you got it on face priority and you're photographing faces. It just locks into those faces. So let's not worry about focus, but let's talk about the three manual settings that you can adjust to give you control over the camera. And as you have more control, you have more creativity. The first one is the shutter speed. You have a dial here that allows you to adjust your shutter speed as you start working towards the manual settings. And you might wonder, well, why would it be important for me to have control over the shutter? Well, if you are filming fast action sports and you want to get a freeze frame of that sport in action, it's good to be able to have a very fast shutter speed. On the other hand, if you want to give the feel of motion, you want to have a very slow shutter speed. For example, if you're out in nature and you come across a little brook and there's water tumbling over some rocks and you want to get that nice, beautiful motion blur of the water coming over the rocks, well, you want to be able to set the manual settings of the camera so that you can have a very slow shutter speed. So the shutter of the camera is up for a longer period of time and allows you to capture that blur of the water going over the rocks. So, like I say, it gives you more creative control and allows you to get exactly what you want if you are able to use the manual settings of the camera. Now, the second thing that you can control with the manual settings is the f-stop. Now, you might wonder, well, what is an f-stop? An f-stop controls the aperture ring of the camera to allow you to tell the camera that you want more light coming in when you release the shutter or less light coming in as you release the shutter. And what it does is it adjusts that aperture so it's a very small hole to let just a little bit of light in when you release the shutter, or to have it wide open so that you get a lot of light hitting the sensor of the camera when you release the shutter. So, shutter speed, and f-stop, or aperture setting, how big your opening is. The third thing is the ISO. Now, some of you who may be new to photography might be wondering, well, what is ISO? ISO basically refers to the sensor of the camera and the ability of the user to adjust the sensitivity of the sensor. And that's great, because what it means is you can have just one camera and be able to use it in a variety of different lighting situations. For example, if you're outside in the bright sunlight, you're going to want to turn your sensitivity way down so that the light coming through the lens of the camera doesn't overwhelm the sensor with such bright light. But then when you step inside and it's not as bright inside, you can adjust the sensitivity of the sensor of the camera so that it can operate in a much lower light situation and still get great photographs. So the ability to adjust your ISO is a great feature of these modern digital DSLR cameras and mirrorless cameras. Some of the older students might remember back in the day when we used to use film cameras that you could buy different types of film that had different sensitivity to light. So if you knew that you're going to be photographing outside in the bright sun, you would buy film that had a rating of 100. Back in the day, it was ASA. You'd buy a film that was ASA 100. I think that changed to ISO even before we went to digital. But now we don't have to buy special film for special conditions. We don't have to be swapping out film when we step inside. We can just adjust the sensitivity of the sensor. So those are the three things that you can manually adjust to be creative in how you expose your shot. Your shutter speed, how fast is it? How slow is it? Your f-stop, how wide the opening is to let the light in, to hit the sensor, and then adjust the sensitivity of the sensor itself. And in order to see this, grab your 90D camera and make sure it's something other than the green A. Why don't you just turn the wheel right over to the M and open up your screen here, and notice at the very top of the camera you have AF, drive, and ISO. Click down on the ISO and you'll see that you have some meters that come to the screen. Now if you don't do anything, after 4 or 5 seconds it goes away. But press it down again, and now you can move the top wheel of your camera, and you can see that you can adjust the ISO of the camera. Or you can have it completely on auto. But as we're moving towards being able to work in the manual settings, you'll want to start experimenting with the ISO settings. Now, if you're indoors, you probably want to start somewhere around 800 to 1000 ISO because there's just not as much light. If you're outdoors on a bright day, you'll want to set this ISO setting to about 100, 150. Then once you've got the ISO set for your environment, then you really only have to concentrate on the shutter speed and the f-stop. So all you have to do then is really just think about 2 adjustments, and you'll be able to manually control your shots with just turning the top wheel and the back wheel. Remember, 3 things to adjust: the shutter speed, the f-stop, and the ISO of the camera. On the Canon 90D, the top wheel here will adjust your shutter speed. The wheel at the back of the camera adjusts your f-stop. And remember, for adjusting the ISO, you just click down on the ISO once and start adjusting your top wheel, and that'll make the adjustments to the ISO. It's that simple. You could, with that knowledge, jump right to the manual settings of the camera and start working. But let's take baby steps. As we make that transition from the auto mode to the manual settings, total manual settings of the camera, let's take a look at the P mode, the TV mode, and the AV mode. Now, the first question that you might have is, what on earth do those letters mean? What is P mode? What is TV mode? And what is AV mode? Well, P mode stands for what I call the program mode. There are some other terms that could be used for that. Some I think are called program automatic that Canon uses. Basically what it does is it's just one step above auto. When you put it to the P mode, the computer is still going to make most of the decisions. It's going to make the decision on your shutter speed and your f-stop to get a good shot. But it allows you to make some adjustments to your focus and to your ISO. And so you have a little more control. In fact, it goes a little beyond that. In the program mode, you can make some slight adjustments to the shutter speed, and the computer will automatically make the adjustments to the f-stop in order to give you a well-exposed shot. All right, and the TV mode. Now, some people say, well, what is the TV mode? Is this what I want to do if I want to shoot video? Do I put it in the TV mode for TV? Well, no, actually, TV stands for time value. And even that is probably a little confusing. What does time value have to do with anything? A better way to understand this setting, the TV setting, is, let's call it shutter priority. In other words, it allows you to manually set the shutter speed of the camera for what you're wanting to take a photograph of, and the computer will make all the rest of the decisions. All you have to do is set your shutter speed, and that can be very helpful. For example, let's say you're out filming some sports, and you want to be able to get some of your shots where you're totally freeze framing the action. Well, you can just adjust your wheel to get a high shutter speed and let the computer inside the camera make all of the other decisions. But then say you want to get those feet in motion, that kind of blurring the legs as they're in motion. Well, you can quickly dial down your shutter speed to be shooting at maybe a 30th of a second. And the really cool thing is, no matter what you do to the shutter speed, making it really fast shutter or opening it up so it's really slow shutter speed, the computer is going to make all the other adjustments so that you still get a good shot. All right, well, let's take a look at the last setting of the three, the AV mode. And AV stands for aperture value. And it might be easier to understand this as aperture priority. In other words, as a photographer, you have control over what you want the aperture to be set to, and the rest of the decisions will be made by the computer of the camera. How is this helpful? Well, it gives you creative control over how much is going to be in focus when you take your shot. If you're shooting landscapes and you want everything to be in focus, well, you want a really high f-stop on the number system. You want to go up to maybe 13 or higher on your aperture. If you are taking portraits, people's faces, and you want the face to be perfectly in focus, but everything in the background blurry to, feature your person, then you want a really low aperture. In other words, you want to get right down to about 2.8. Or if you want just the eyes in focus and everything else, if you've got the right lens, you can go right down to 1.8, or there's even some lenses that are 1.2. And being able to make those kinds of adjustments in a really fast-moving environment where you want to move from portraits to landscapes very quickly, well, it's nice to be in the AV mode because all you have to worry about is the aperture setting. And by the way, earlier we were saying that the top wheel is for the shutter speed on the 90D, and the back wheel is for the f-stop. Well, when you're in the AV mode, it's the top wheel. That's the one that you adjust. That's the one that's closest to the shutter, so they put it up here when you're in the AV mode. When you get to the point where you're shooting with the manual mode, then remember that the top wheel adjusts your shutter speed and the back wheel adjusts your f-stop. But just in the AV mode, your adjustments are going to be made up here in the top wheel, and that's very handy. Now, before we head on over there, I want to let you know that I'm going to swap out the kit lens that comes with the camera with a lens that has a little bit more range on the f-stop. Unfortunately, the kit lens that comes with the Canon, in order to keep the price down, they've provided a kit lens that especially when it's all the way out, only goes down to 5.6 as an aperture. When you are all the way in, you are able to go down to 3.5. So that's not so bad, but I wanted to, in order to demonstrate some of the creativity that you can do with some of these settings, I'm going to throw on my 85 prime here. It's a beautiful lens. It goes right down to 1.4 as an f-stop. And but I just wanted to assure you that if you don't have a budget for a lens like this, and this is about $3,000 here in Canada, if you don't have a budget for that, you can still play around with these low f-stops in some of these creative modes that Canon provides here using a much cheaper lens. You can get a 50 millimeter prime lens for about $200. That also goes down to 1.8 f-stop. And so don't feel like just because all I have is the kit lens, I can't do as much with these modes. Well, just know that there is that option out there. Just head down to your camera store and pick up one of those 50 millimeter primes, and you'll be able to go right down to 1.8 on your f-stop as you start to learn how to work with some of these modes on the Canon camera. All right, let's head on over, and I'll be able to show you a little easier what some of these modes will do. Well, we've made our move to the other part of our studio setup here, and I'd really love to take you outside for this particular segment of the video, take you out to one of our beautiful forests here in Canada. Unfortunately, we are right now in Canada in the dead of winter, and it's just too cold to be filming out there right now today. And so we're going to make do with our setup here in our makeshift studio. I'm sure we'll be able to show you everything that we need to share. Now, before we go to the creative modes that we're featuring in this video, I wanted to show you something back in the auto mode that I only just discovered today. I had no idea this was possible in the auto mode, and it is so cool that I have to share it with you. Let's move our mode dial back to the auto mode, and let's just hit OK. Now, instead of just taking a photograph of this flower that we have set up here, this orchid, in the auto mode, we could. I mean, just tap the screen there, it'll take a nice shot. But notice what's possible if you just simply touch or press in on the info button once. You'll notice this little colorful wheel down in the corner. Go ahead and touch that. And here in this mode, I can actually override the auto settings of the camera. I can just take my finger and slide this little bar across and tell the computer of the camera just how much blur I want in the background. So let's say I do want kind of a sharper background. I just slide that over, take the shot, and now we've got more in focus in the background. Most likely what you would ever want to do is go the opposite direction. If the camera is giving you something like this and you want to blur the background more, then what you'd want to do is take this back so that it is blurring more of the background. That's a more pleasing shot there. And then take our shot. Now, I had to use the shutter release to get it last time. Let's see what happens if I hit OK and now use the, yeah, that looks like that works. So let's take a look at one more thing with this. Let's take a look at brightness. So if you're not quite happy with what the computer of the camera is deciding for your brightness, let's say you're in a backlit situation, well, even in the auto mode of the camera, you can turn this on and make adjustments as to how much compensation you want to go either way, just with that slider bar. And I have to say, that's pretty cool. Take the shot. Now, I did mention there's a number of things that you can adjust here. Let's take a look quickly at some of the others. You can adjust contrast, saturation, but because we're going to be doing all of that later in Lightroom or Photoshop, I would not recommend doing this. I mean, I suppose if you wanted to send something right off to Facebook without processing it, and you had JPEGs being saved as well as raw images, you know, I suppose you could play with this, give yourself a little bit more saturation right inside. But the problem is this is going to be what we call baked into the shot. And you'll always have that saturation unless you pull it back in Lightroom. So saturation I would probably leave alone. Vivid, yeah, again, we're going to be baking in some things that we might not want. But just so you know that they are there, you can actually override the auto settings of the camera just by turning on the info button. And that's pretty cool. All right, well, let's go on. Let's move on to the P mode of the camera. And right away, you're given the option of just going neutral. Or if you're in a bright setting, I suppose you could start with darker. But let's just go with the standard, hit OK. All right, so here we are in the program mode. And remember, the program mode, the computer is deciding the shutter speed and the f-stop. You have the ability to select an ISO and some focusing and some other settings, but the computer for the most part is selecting the shutter speed and f-stop. Now, even though it's doing that, you can override the computer settings a couple of ways. In the P mode, the wheels, the top wheel and the back wheel, do a little bit different function than what I was telling you earlier when you're in the manual mode. When you're in the P mode, and if you don't see all of the settings at the back right away, just lightly tap the shutter release button and you'll see more options at the back. Once you've done that, notice how if you turn the top wheel that you are adjusting the f-stop, and the camera is automatically compensating by adjusting the shutter speed. So for example, we're set up to film some nice flowers here. We'd like the background to be out of focus. We know that in order to do that, we need a low f-stop. So even though the camera has gone with automatically 2.8 at 1/60th of a second, we can change that. We can go down even further, and let's try right down to 1.4. And notice that the camera has made the adjustment to the shutter speed so that you'll get a correctly exposed shot. If you wanted to go the opposite direction and have more of the background in focus, you could adjust your f-stop so that you go way up. Now, one thing I've noticed in the P mode, the live view doesn't necessarily show you the change of the focus of the background. It looks identical to what it was when I had it at 1.4. However, if I was to take a photograph, and notice because we didn't take it right away, it reverted back to what it thought would be the best. So you have to take it right away if you're making these kinds of adjustments. So let's say we wanted f-stop 10. We have to take that shot right away. And then what comes to the screen, that is showing the background being a little bit more in focus. This particular lens It's you probably have to go up to f-stop 22 in order to have everything in focus. Now, one more thing about the P mode that I want to point out, and that is when you're in the P mode, the back wheel is going to do an exposure compensation. Notice what happens when we turn the back wheel one direction. The camera is going to say, okay, we want it brighter than what the computer is deciding on its own. If you turn it the other way, it's going to go darker. So the back wheel in the P mode is actually exposure compensation, going darker, going brighter. Okay, let's go on to the TV mode, or shutter priority. It says it right there on the screen, shutter priority. All right, so here we are in the shutter priority mode. And this time, as we turn the top wheel, notice that the shutter speed is changing. However, as you change the shutter speed to be what you want, let's say we want to stop motion in a sports environment, we want to take it right up to, well, it looks like in this light, we're inside and the light coming in from the outside is not the greatest today. And so we notice that the aperture is flashing. And when it flashes like that, the computer is telling you, okay, you're at 1,000th of a second, but it's not going to give you a correct exposure or a neutral exposure unless you make some other adjustments, because it's just too dark in here. So let's go back on our shutter speed at 1/800th of a second in this light. I can take a photograph at f1.4. And let's see if I can just do it with I can just touch the screen. So what if we do want to get that high shutter speed in a darker room like we have here? Well, you remember, can make an adjustment to the ISO. So let's do that. Let's say we want that shutter speed, and that's the top dial, right up to 1/2000th of a second to really stop that motion, freeze frame it. But notice the screen, it's really dark. It's not going to give us a correctly exposed image. If we were to take the photo right now, it would be dark. And so remember the compensation that we can do to get back to a situation where our f-stop isn't flashing. We can go to the top section of our camera here, press down on ISO, and just bring the ISO up. Let's maybe bring it up to 1600. Never really want to go too much higher than 1600, because then we start introducing grain into the shot. But I see that by adjusting the ISO, that I now can take the photograph at 1/2000th of a second and still be okay, still get a correct shot. It's no longer flashing. So let's take this shot, and we've got a beautiful orchid. Now, let's say it's a waterfall situation, or you want to get the motion of the person running. Well, we take our shutter speed and we go right down to, say, let's take it right down to 1/15th of a second. Now, the camera has made the adjustment so that we're now taking the photograph at 16, an f-stop of 16, which means that a lot of the photograph is going to be in focus. So you're not going to have that nice bokeh background, even though it's displaying that to the screen right now in the live mode. I'm not sure why. Maybe this is the advantage of having a mirrorless camera. You have a better update on the live mode. But let's just go ahead and take the photograph and see what it looks like at 1/15th of a second and shooting at an f-stop of 16. And now as it comes back, you'll see the background is more in focus. And because it's on a tripod, and nothing's moving. If we were outside in the wind like I would like to be, this flower could be going back and forth, and you'd get a little bit of that motion of it going back and forth because we had it down to 1/15th of a second. And you can even go lower than that. Let's come back to our live mode and adjust that wheel some more. We could even go up to 1 second having the shutter speed open. Now notice the camera is really demonstrating to us that this is just way too much light. But remember, we're up here on an ISO of 1600. We can back way off of that Let's see what happens. Let's hit the ISO button and bring this right down. And now we're right up to f22, and it's going to give us a nicely exposed shot, even though the shutter is going to be open for a whole second. And this would work really nice if you're out there and you've got a nice bubbling creek and you want that beautiful flow, capture that in your photograph. Now, I probably, even on a tripod, wouldn't hit the button here because that's going to cause a little shake. But having the live mode on, I can just touch the screen and it's going to take that shot. Notice how much more the background is in focus. Now, one other trick I was showing you in a couple lessons back to avoid that shake on one of these photographs where the shutter is open for a whole second, you could go to your drive button here and just turn the wheel down to 2 seconds delay. And what's going to happen is after I press the shutter release, it's going to wait 2 seconds and take the shot. So even though it's open for a whole second, because it's on a tripod and because I'm not touching the camera, it's going to take a nice clean shot with no shake around. All right, so again, in these creative modes, the back wheel is there to help you make an adjustment to the exposure. If you're looking at the screen and you're not quite happy because you're in a backlit situation, there's too much light coming in from the window or whatever, well, we want to expose for the person that might be sitting in front of the window rather than the bright light behind them. And so here in the P mode, the TV mode, and the AV mode, the back wheel is going to allow you to do exposure compensation. And in order to see what you're doing, you have to kind of touch the shutter release gently and then start turning the back wheel, and notice as we turn it to the right, it's going to get brighter, and that'll allow you to expose for exactly what you're photographing more correctly with a difficult lighting situation. We turn it the other way, turn it to the left, and it gets darker. So you're kind of overriding what the computer is deciding based on your human sight that you want it to just go one way or the other there. Notice that if you wait too long, you can't make that adjustment. You have to tap the little shutter release button again, and then you can make that exposure compensation at the back. And the same goes for the AV mode. Let's go on to that and notice that you can make those same exposure compensations in the aperture priority mode as well. But to really make adjustments on the aperture priority is the top wheel. And as you turn that, you'll notice that the f-stop changes, and the computer is going to automatically adjust the shutter speed to give you a correct exposure. And then as you turn the top wheel, you'll notice that the f-stop changes. And for just a point of review, the reason why people like to have the ability to adjust the aperture very quickly is because, let's say we do want the flower to be featured and everything behind it out of focus, well, then we just know that we have to take that f-stop right down to 1.8 or 1.6, 1.4 with this particular lens before we take the shot. And then as we take the shot, we've got that 2-second delay, the background's going to be out of focus. But if you're doing that, you're filming the flower or a portrait, and all of a sudden you see a group over here and you want everybody to be in focus, well, if you're in the aperture priority, you can very quickly adjust the f-stop so that it's up to about 10, maybe even 13 or 14. And now the shot you take of the group, everything's going to be in focus. And the computer has already made the decision to change your f-stop. Now, because we're in a low light situation here again, it's giving us a pretty low shutter speed here. And if you were outdoors, you'd probably be fine. But in here, it's just too low of a shutter speed. If we weren't on a tripod, that shot would be blurry. But remember, when you're in a situation like that, you still can actually do it by changing the ISO. Let's just bring that ISO up again to maybe 1250 this time. And notice that our shutter speed, well, it's still not very good. This is a pretty dark room we're working in. Let's take it on up to maybe 2000. And there, we're still only at 25th of a second. You're going to have to be holding that camera pretty steady to get a clean shot. So I would recommend in this case maybe trying to bring this f-stop back down to about 10. And then you're at 1/50th of a second, and we can take the shot. And if you've got that 2-second delay especially, you'll be able to hold that camera steady while you get the shot. All right, well, I believe that does it for our lesson today. I hope that it has been helpful. I know that the first time you run through this kind of instruction, it might not be clear. There's too many things going on, but I'd recommend maybe watching the lesson 2 or 3 times with the camera in your hand, maybe the manual handy, and after you've watched it a couple times, you'll be able to fully understand the advantages of each of these settings: the auto setting, the P setting, the TV setting, the AV setting. And next time, we'll start talking about how to take photographs and video in the manual settings. That's where we're headed. And we've already shared a lot of the principles of what you need to know to start working in the manual settings. And we're just going to build on that in our next lesson. Until then, farewell for now.